The French company of Panhard was, and remains perhaps the largest provider of wheeled armored vehicles of the French military ever since the interwar era. The manufacturer of many of France's most successful armored cars, such as the Panhard 178 or the AML. One of the company's most peculiar armored vehicles for its time was the 8-wheeled Panhard EBR. It was developed as a response to a program initiated as early as March of 1945 by the French military, looking for a 75mm armed, high-mobility, long-range, wheeled reconnaissance vehicle. Panhard's vehicle was adopted in December of 1949 and mass-produced in 2 major variants all the way up to 1960. Notable for its quite heavy firepower for a wheeled vehicle, its 8-wheel configuration with 2 metallic side wheels on each side being used to improve the vehicle's cross-terrain capacities, and dual driving posts guaranteeing equal speed forward and backward, the EBR served as a mainstay of the French military's reconnaissance force for most of the Cold War. The vehicle was finally retired in 1985. In comparison to many other French military vehicles of the era, the EBR was long excluded from most popular video games focusing on armored vehicles, due to those for a time almost exclusively including tracked vehicles. In recent years though, the progressive diversification of these games, and notably Wargaming's World of Tanks, has led to the inclusion of French wheeled vehicles in the game's Update 1.4 on the 6th of February 2018. As part of that upgrade, 6 French wheeled vehicles were added to the game. Of those, one was Hotchkiss's EBR prototype, the unlucky competitor to the Panhard EBR in the late 1940s, and 2 variants of the Panhard EBR, the EBR 90 and the so-called EBR 105, armed with a 105mm gun in a turret that has never been seen on the EBR. Welcome to a new Tank Encyclopedia voiced article. I'm Stan and we're back at picking on World of Tanks and Wargaming. In some of the recent videos, some of you have complained of the audio quality from my narration, and you are quite correct in it, which is why I'm currently reading this with a blanket on my head, trying to reduce the echo. Nonetheless, while I do not have a good narration voice, nor do I have an excellent microphone, I am not actually intended to continue voicing these indefinitely. The big idea is that we would find someone talented enough to take over the narration of these videos in the near future. So if you'd like to have a go and try to become the lead voice of a fast-growing channel, why not give it a go and try narrating something and see if you're a good fit for our team. For applications, just leave a comment or contact us on Discord. See you there. Historically, the Panhard EBR went through 2 major upgrades to its firepower during its service. As it first entered service, the EBR was fitted with the 75mm SA-49 main gun, a medium-velocity 75mm gun offering anti-armor performances more along the lines of the 75mm guns used in vehicles the likes of the Panzer IV during the Second World War, so quite outdated by the 1950s. This gun was fitted in the FL-11, a fairly small oscillating turret featuring no autoloader but a manual loader instead. The first concept for improving the EBR's firepower was straight up giving the vehicle the FL-10 turret used on the AMX-13, which featured the longer 75mm SA-50 with an autoloader and was much larger and heavier. This concept was first considered in 1951. An EBR prototype first received the FL-10 turret in 1952, and after an order in July of 1953, the first examples would be delivered in the last days of 1954. This model would be known as the EBR Model 1954. The 75mm SA-50 offered much more firepower than the SA-49, but the addition of the FL-10 turret made the EBR heavier from 12.5 to 14.9 tons and higher. Therefore, the FL-10 armed model only supplemented the FL-11 armed one, with only about 280 FL-10 equipped EBRs manufactured, while about 900 FL-11 equipped ones were produced. The 1960s saw considerable evolution in anti-tank gun technology, and notably lower pressure guns firing heat projectiles. These new guns could offer performances similar or even superior to older low-velocity guns at a fraction of the weight. For the EBR, this resulted in the D921A gun, the same as on Panhard's lighter AML, being adopted for the FL-11 equipped examples in 1964. With the Panhard EBR being out of production by 4 years at this point, 650 FL-11 equipped EBRs were refitted with the 90mm gun, and all remaining EBRs equipped with the FL-10 or FL-11 were phased out of service. No major firepower upgrade appears to have been considered on the EBR following the refitting of the 90mm D921A, with the vehicle quickly appearing to be, by most measures, quite obsolete. While a replacement was considered as early as the 1960s in the form of the ERAC, its final development, the AMX-10RC, would only enter service in the late 1970s, leaving the last EBRs soldiering on until 1985 in France. In Wargaming's world of tanks, the EBR 105 stands as the pinnacle of French wheeled vehicles in the game as a tier 10. It serves as the conclusion of the branch. Wargaming's description of the vehicle is as follows: a variant of the Panhard EBR armored vehicle with more powerful armament. It featured improved suspension and the two-man GIAT TS-90 turret upgraded to accommodate a 105mm gun. The vehicle never saw mass production nor entered service. Nothing is mentioned in the way of dates, however, a quick examination of the vehicle would show it to be at least in 1970s development due to its turret being first mounted on an armored vehicle in 1977. The turret mounted on the EBR 105 is a modified version of the Nexter TS-90 turret, mounted on the old hull of the EBR. Introduced by Nexter in 1977, this is a welded two-man turret with a manually loaded 90mm anti-tank gun in its historical configuration. This fairly light turret could theoretically be mounted on any vehicle that could accommodate a sufficiently large turret ring, as well as weigh at least 7.5 tons. However, Wargaming did not straight up take the historical TS-90 turret and mount it on the EBR. This would already be an unhistorical combination. By the time the TS-90 was around, the EBR was on its way out, with its straight up replacement, the AMX-10RC, beginning to enter service. The sometimes more than 25-year-old hulls were worn out by years of intensive use, and there was little will or need to keep using them for long. Wargaming, however, designed its own heavily modified version of it. It is referred to as the Panhard EBR 105 turret. In real life, the TS-90 is a two-man turret with a manually loaded 90mm gun. In this form, it is already quite cramped. Wargaming, however, swapped out the turret's 90mm CN90F4 for the older but far larger 105mm D1504 or CN10557. The 105mm gun featured, for example, on the Israeli M51 Sherman, the AMX-13105 or the SK-105 Cuirassier. This gun is manually loaded on the EBR 105. However, it ought to be noted that another fake vehicle produced by Wargaming that uses the same modified TS-90 turret is fed by a 2-round autoloader. Wargaming's 105mm armed version of the TS-90 is visibly extended towards the rear, most likely in order to simulate the larger breech. Unlike on the Burasque, in which the presence of both an autoloader and the larger breech would likely have made the turret extremely cramped, the EBR's version of the modified TS-90 may be somewhat more plausible in terms of internal space. However, this turret having a two-man crew means the commander would also assume the role of loader, for the fairly large 105mm rounds used by the CN-105-57, making his task more complex and harder to perform. Historically, there are no known projects aiming to mount a 105mm gun in the TS-90 turret. Wargaming's EBR-105 is stated to have a weight of 17 tons. Whether the vehicle would actually feature such a weight with Wargaming's fictional version of the TS-90 turret is not known. This is, however, a considerable addition of weight onto the EBR, weighing slightly more than 2 tons more than the FL-10 equipped 1954 model and 4.5 tons more than the original FL-11 equipped production model. While Wargaming does mention the vehicle as having reinforced suspension in its short description, the EBR's capacity to reasonably operate at such a weight is unknown. What is almost certainly unimaginable, though, is that the vehicle received the tremendous upgrade in power plant Wargaming gave to the EBR-105. Historically, all models of the EBR use the Panhard 12H6000S engine. This 12-cylinder air-cooled engine could produce up to 200 horsepower at 3,700 RPM, which was sufficient to give the EBR quite admirable maximum speed for the time. The model 1951 FL-11 equipped model could peak at 105 km per hour on a good road, and despite receiving no power plant upgrade, the heavier FL-10 equipped model 1954 was reported to be able to reach this speed as well. The engine used in Wargaming's EBR-105 appears to be a development of the original Panhard engine used in the EBR, being referred to as the Panhard 12H6000X, but it has been boosted to an implausible 720 horsepower. It is unlikely such a powerful engine could be derived from the 12H engine to begin with, and combined with the idea that it may be fitted in an EBR hull, is stretching the bounds of plausibility to the limit, seeing as this would likely result in a much larger power plant. Wargaming's EBR-105 did receive some notable changes to its design. Notably, the rear no longer features any form of driving post, but instead what appears more along the line of an engine compartment, which raises the question of where the vehicle's fourth crew member, which Wargaming refers to as a radio operator, would be located. However, the idea that this hull change would be enough to fit such a powerful and likely larger engine is very unlikely. This engine gives Wargaming's vehicle a power-to-weight ratio of 42.35 horsepower per ton, far higher than the EBR model 1951's mere 16 horsepower per ton. However, despite this, Wargaming's EBR-105 is still appreciably slower than all of the other EBRs, at merely 91 km per hour. In general, all that surrounds its automotive capacities and upgrades can be described as quite nonsensical. The EBR-105 that Wargaming introduced into World of Tanks is obviously a fake vehicle. While it may take inspiration from the fact the EBR was mass-produced with 2 different turrets and received considerable firepower upgrades during its service life, this does not change the fact that, as it is presented, the vehicle makes little sense. The use of components such as the TS-90 turret would suggest the EBR-105 would have been a late 1970s project, and by that time the far superior AMX-10RC would have been on its way to replace the EBR, 105mm armed or not. This is particularly underlined by the fact a vehicle such as the EBR-105 would have been very close to a complete rebuild, with a new engine, new turret, new hull rear, and reinforced suspension. There would in the end be little but the mere shell of the original EBR left, a most likely very costly upgrade. The EBR-105 is far from the only fake tank featured in World of Tanks. In general, World of Tanks, particularly its higher tiers, contains a quantity of fake vehicles. One could, for example, cite most Chinese tank destroyers, or the FV-215B, Conqueror gun carriage, or Carnarvon Action 10. As for unhistorical configurations of vehicles that did actually exist, those are legion, though some are more shocking than others.